Have you ever had one of those photo shoots that you thought was going really well, and then you've come to realize that things weren't so great after you've come home and pulled up everything in Photoshop? Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel, Georgia Photography, where I talk all things photography. So recently, I went to a waterfall at Vickery Creek in Roswell, Georgia. So the night before, I had everything ready to go. I had my batteries all charged, my lenses, my CPL filters, my tripods. And so I woke up the next morning early and I made sure I got to the park maybe about 30 minutes to an hour after sunrise. And it was a little overcast, but the good thing is that there was hardly anybody there. So I didn't really have to be too concerned with setting up my tripod and getting in the way of someone else on the path. And I was able to go to some of the more scenic places around Vickery Creek and set up my gear and leave it out and not be watching it all the time so I could focus on setting my different camera settings. Now, something that I noticed when I was setting my camera settings, I had a very narrow aperture on some of these photos. And I was also shooting at an ISO of 100 for pretty much everything. I wanted to capture some of the movement of the waterfall, so I was shooting at a shutter speed of 1 to 5 seconds. And it really varied depending on the conditions and how bright the photo I thought was going to turn out. The only thing is, I think things maybe turned out a little too bright. I noticed a little more success for some of the photos that were shot in the shade. But if I could go back, I would probably plan to bring an ND filter. Now, the CPL filter was good, but I think that only brings down the exposure or f-stop a couple stops. But if I were to shoot with another filter, I would probably get a 6-stop ND filter. I talked to a buddy of mine later that day, and I told him what was going on. I pulled up all the photos and a lot of them were overexposed, and what he told me was that photography is trial and error, but mostly error. I am a relatively new photographer. I consider myself a hobbyist. The point of my channel is to basically teach others what I learn as I experience different things, such as going to waterfalls, such as yesterday. Overall, I was actually pretty happy with at least a small handful of the photos that I took when I was at Vickery Creek. I was able to open them up in Photoshop and tweak some of the settings, and not every single one of them was overexposed, so I was glad I was at least able to salvage a few of them out of probably dozens of different photos that I took. Earlier in the week, I was at my local park, Henderson Park here in Tucker, Georgia, and they have a small waterfall, and I went there at sunset, and I think some of those maybe turned out a little bit better. I didn't even have a filter on my lens, but when I went, the sun was already starting to set, and I was mostly in the shade because there are a lot of trees around me, and so even though I was shooting with a shutter speed lasting from 1 to 3 seconds, I was still able to keep my ISO pretty low. In my aperture, I think I was aiming for f11 to f16. So I was really happy with how some of those photos turned out. As you can tell, it's fall here in Georgia, and that brings some extra color and vibrance to these photos with all the leaves on the trees and those that have fallen on the rocks. And so it's been really fun time to get out there and snap some shots. So as far as some advice I could give you as far as taking photographs of waterfalls, would definitely to bring at least a CPL filter and an ND filter. And if it's especially bright, perhaps an ND filter that brings your exposure down 6 stops. This will allow you to keep your ISO low, as well as to have your aperture set kind of in the mid-range. I think that the sweet spot might be having it set from f11 to f16. You don't want to go too low or too high, because I think that could create some artifacts or perhaps lessen the quality of your overall picture. And so this will allow you to also shoot at a longer exposure time, anywhere from 1 to 5, 6 seconds. And so you'll be able to capture that movement of the water and get that really silky feel to the waterfall as the water flows down, as gravity pulls it further down the river or wherever you're at. I would also recommend that you bring a tripod, because if you're trying to do longer exposure times, it would be best to have that mounted and be stable to prevent any kind of camera movement as you're leaving the shutter open. I think that it would also be a good idea to use a timer so that your finger isn't pushing down on a shutter button, which could make the camera move around a little bit. A microfiber cloth would also be handy so that you could wipe your lens off in case it gets a little wet. So as far as other tips I could give you, I would definitely recommend having your camera bag all set, ready to go. Fully charged batteries, filters, tripods laid out, lenses ready, SD cards formatted, ready. And as far as the location where you're taking your photographs, I would also recommend getting there perhaps a week or two ahead of time and scouting the area out, thinking about where maybe some good places would be to take some photographs. I was actually at Vickery Creek in Roswell 2 or 3 weeks before I was there this week, and I was kind of thinking in the back of my head, oh, that would be a good place to be, out on the rocks, or maybe on this platform I could take some photos on there. Just have in the back of your head where you think some different places around the area might work. And also, I should probably mention that if you're not taking your photographs in RAW, it might be something to consider, because Photoshop has this really robust interface that opens with all these different color correction tools at your disposal as soon as you open up a RAW photo file in that software program. Well, that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching, and if you liked this video, also please consider subscribing. Take care.